Well, I think it's pretty clear that Morgan McSweeney has decided to take one for the team, or more specifically, Gemma, to take one for his boss, Sir Keir Starmer. And it's worth remembering that he really is Sir Keir Starmer's right-hand man, but he's decided to say, hey, look, appointing Peter Mandelson, that was pretty much my idea. It was a bad idea. I'm gone. So that's the plan anyway. He takes the blame. He's the fall guy and hopes that somehow that'll keep his boss, Sir Keir Starmer, on the pitch.
And just how explosive has this story about Peter Mandelson been?
Oh, my goodness, Gemma. I mean, it is just totally explosive. There's one historian in Britain who I totally respect, who thinks that this is one of the biggest scandals of the last 100 years, which is saying something if you think about British history these last 100 years. I mean, it is a huge scandal because it involves a sitting prime minister. I mean, not that anyone's saying that Keir Starmer did anything wrong, but the fact that he appointed Peter Mandelson, given Peter Mandelson's history in the UK and, of course, these allegations about his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. So, you know, the idea that a senior minister might have been passing important information to his friend Jeffrey Epstein and that it could bring down a prime minister. I mean, it doesn't get much more serious than this. And you know, it's worth remembering this is all on top of all the issues surrounding the former Prince Andrew and his dramatic fall from grace.
Now, McSweeney's resignation is said to leave the Prime Minister very exposed. Can you tell us about that?
Well, exposed in this sense that it's often said, isn't it, in politics, whether in Britain or no doubt in Australia as well, that you want to maybe leave your shield in place. But once you've sacrificed your foil, as it were, what happens next? What do you sacrifice when the next thing goes wrong? So that is the argument against having agreed to Morgan McSweeney's resignation. But I guess both Mr. McSweeney and Sir Keir Starmer felt that things are so intense. And of course, it's hard to explain this to everyone as far away as you are in Australia. But I can't tell you how kind of frenetic the mood is within the governing Labour Party. So they must have thought, you know what, it's a risk getting rid of the foil, but better than keeping him, maybe.
And you mentioned earlier you're taking one for the team, but could Keir Starmer lose his job?
Well, that's a really big question. I'm glad we got a chance to address it, Gemma. I mean, the problem for Sir Keir Starmer, right, is that fairly or unfairly, a lot of people inside the governing Labour Party think that he is a very poor prime minister and a very poor leader of their party. And they've sort of made up their mind about this. So Morgan McSweeney, is it really going to change many of their minds? I'm not so sure. And that is why you very much have this sense in Britain of Sir Keir Starmer being a man who's living on borrowed time, that his party might not get rid of him tomorrow. They might not get rid of him next week, but you know, maybe before important elections that we have coming up in May in the United Kingdom, or maybe after those elections if they turn out badly. But yeah, there's a sort of sense here that prime ministers have tried this before. You know, you get rid of your chief of staff, hope that changes things, but an awful lot of people in Britain, the polls suggest, have really made up their mind about Sir Keir Starmer already.
And you know, where are the polls at 18 months after a landslide win for Labor?
Well, they're absolutely shocking. I mean, Sir Keir Starmer is the most unpopular prime minister, the most unpopular leader since this kind of polling began. And I'm sure a lot of people in Australia will be amazed about this because he's a pretty sort of mild-mannered, bland guy. I don't mean that in a mean way, but right, he's an ex-lawyer and a prosecutor, but he is spectacularly unpopular, and so are the Labour Party. Only not much more than a year after that massive landslide victory. And I think there's a reason for that, that, you know, British people, British voters have just been utterly fed up for about 25, 30 years, a lot of kind of whinging poms, very unhappy about things. And I guess maybe they had some vague hope that things would change after 14 years of Conservative government under Sir Keir Starmer and Labour. And most voters feel, you know what, nothing much has changed. He promised economic growth. He promised to do away with the drama and the scandals, whoops, of the last 14 years of Conservative government. So in other words, you know, he came into power, you know, in front of a country and an electorate who are in an unhappy and sour mood. And so, you know, there was always a chance that he was going to get a thorough kicking. And that's exactly what he's getting.
And Rob, bedtime in London now, but I imagine you'll be waking up to another frenetic day there.
Frenetic day, frenetic week. What we understand is that Sir Keir Starmer is going to address the members of the Labour Party, as many MPs, there's about 400 odd of them. He's going to try and persuade them at a closed-door meeting Monday evening UK time that he is worth sticking by, that he is a decent man. He hasn't gone into politics to somehow make himself kind of richer or for personal gain. But he's got an uphill struggle, Gemma, because, as I said, an awful lot of Labour MPs, members of the party more widely in the country, they've just made up their mind that he's a dud. And I think it's going to be hard for him to change that. The only thing that's really saving him, two things that are saving him briefly. One is there isn't really an obvious successor who would unite the party. And then the second thing, of course, is Labour is worried that they're going to look like the Conservatives. 7 prime ministers in 10 years. I mean, that would be a difficult thing to inflict on the British people. So that may be keeping him in his place for some time.